our interviewees, so he's helped us throughout, and it's a real honour to be here. Bengal History is an absolute institution, so very lucky to be here. Also, I have to leave at 7:30, unfortunately, so I'm very glad that the Q&A has been recorded, but I'll have to send out after the presentation's finished. So first of all, just to say that the research on which this presentation is funded, research on which this presentation is based is funded by the Legal Trust and the ESRC. And we're going to display details of methodology, but if anyone's interested in methodology, obviously we'll have to answer questions about that later. It's worth explaining, first of all, that in total 120 British Bangladeshis were interviewed, and 75 interviews across our 3 field sites, which are London, Birmingham and Luton. And that was in the form of semi-structured interviews with parents and children, and there were 45 of those interviews, as well as supplementary narrative interviews with people over 60, and also interviews with members of civil society, which is one. So, drawing on this data, we're going to demonstrate how anti-Muslim racism has been conflated with intensified anti-immigrant sentiment in the context of hostile environment, immigration policies, and Brexit, producing an amplification of racist discourses, which we're arguing today has generated a level of insecurity that is actually altering some people's relationships with Bangladesh. So, just to give you a very quick kind of location in terms of the academic literature, there's been a lot of interest in the relationship between integration and transnationalism. There's been a lot of interest in the idea of a relationship between the two within academic writing, but also obviously in policy debates and in popular discourse. Very often the suggestion that somehow the two are compatible. However, within these discussions, the importance of the national political context is very much marginalised. So transnational practice is often displayed as a function either of migration processes or of the cultural characteristics of particular groups. And very often, the context of the receiving society is kind of ignored. In relation to Muslim migrants, this is often particularly striking. As Aaron Kandani argues, the focus is very often on the characteristics of Muslim migrants or Islamic culture in a way that ignores the role of social and political circumstances in shaping how people make sense of the world and act upon it. So we're going to be focusing very much on specific social and political circumstances today and the effect that they might have on transnational practice. In relation to this, one exception in the literature is the concept of reactive transnationalism, which attempts to better understand the local context in which transnationalism takes place. So specifically, it relates to the positive effect of perceived discrimination on transnational practice. And the concept has generally been studied using quantitative methods. So it's been argued that more detailed interview data is necessary to provide context and depth. We argue specifically in relation to experiences of discrimination, what those experiences of discrimination actually look like, which quantitative data hasn't been able to capture. So, what did we find in relation to the discrimination part of this equation? Anti-Muslim and anti-Asian racism were both discussed by interviewees in the context of intensified anti-immigrant sentiment, which was the cause and consequence of what's become known as hostile environment immigration policy in the UK, which began in around 2012 when Theresa May was in charge of the Home Office. The hostile environment refers, as many of you know, to a set of administrative and legislative measures designed to make staying in the UK as difficult as possible for so-called illegal migrants. And one early example in 2013 were these Home Office immigration, these so-called go-home bans, Home Office immigration publicity campaigns, were advertising bans with slogans telling illegal immigrants to go home or face arrest. It's been argued that the go-home ban signalled a turning point in the climate and immigration debates, in which government-sponsored advertising had begun using the same language as the far right. And it's worth noting that the initial objections to the hostile environmental immigration policy, particularly the Immigration Act of 2014, focused on the fact that it wouldn't just target illegal immigrants, it would incentivise discrimination against ethnic minorities as well. And recently this has been found to be the case. Earlier this year, the High Court found that one of the key planks of the hostile environment, the so-called right to rent policy, in which landlords are required to ask prospective tenants for proof of their legal status in the UK before renting them. So this right to rent policy has indeed caused landlords to discriminate against ethnic minority tenants where they otherwise would not. And Brexit. Anti-immigrant rhetoric escalated in the run-up to Brexit in June 2016. Racial and religious hate crime rose by a startling 31 attacks a day following the vote, or according to the Home Office's own figures, by 41% when compared to the same month the previous year. And almost a year after the vote, this increase was sustained according to numbers produced by the police. As suspected, this discrimination wasn't just directed towards migrants, but minorities as well, and very often Muslim minorities. Anti-Muslim hate crime in particular spiked, according to the Islamophobia hate crime reporting service in Alabama. Shabed here says, I don't think Islamophobia is going to go away. I think it will probably get worse, especially with, the sentiment of the country following Brexit. Because, people voted to say, look, let's stop immigrants coming in. There's lots of anti-immigrant feeling, anti-Muslim sentiment. So you can see how Shabed blurs anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric, like much of the public commentary of the time. And the idea of taking back control of the country was rapidly transposed onto a concern with the policing of national borders. And that policing was often directed towards Muslims, as Luton and Birmingham told us. Islamophobia is a big problem now here. It's a big problem after Brexit. Somebody went to my restaurant and decided to go into the kitchen, just opened the door, it was about 10 o'clock, and he was saying, what are you guys doing here? You voted for Brexit. And then he started talking about the religion and all that, he started talking about the Muslims and this and that. So this gentleman thought the vote for Brexit meant that anyone who wasn't, I'm assuming, white British had to leave the country. That's what it was, yes. This is what he's thinking. He thinks that you guys, what are you guys doing? I said, you belong, so we're not going anywhere. And Luton and who's a sociologist, has argued that the micropolitics of race hate that occurs in everyday encounters at the local scale can perform as a means of exerting white territoriality, marking Muslims as out of place in an act of purging the nation. We argue that what's specific to this particular conjuncture is a sense in which the performative purge of race hate might no longer be performative. What are you guys doing here? You voted for Brexit. It speaks to what some people believe Brexit might actually achieve. As interviewees suggested, this is about an opportunity to turn back the clock, to cast people out of the nation, to cleanse the body politic. Javed adds, Brexit highlighted Islamophobia. It's more highlighted now. All of a sudden, the people in this country think, we're out of Europe, we don't need anybody else from any other country, they all need to go out. Alan and Luton, I definitely think Islamophobia is growing, especially after Brexit as well. People felt that the immigration situation, that now Muslims need to get out as well. So anti-Muslim and anti-Asian racism were not created by Brexit, obviously. And of course, UK immigration policy was racialised long before the implementation of the hostile environment. But there's a specificity to the concern expressed here, which was about, in Alan's words, Muslims needed to get out of it. People were worried. Mariana says, I can't even talk about it, that's how angry it makes me feel. But at the same time now I feel really scared to see what's going to happen in about 5 years' time. It gives these like UKIP and Britain First, it gives them all a platform. So many people voted Leave just because of immigration, because they hate Muslims. Barry says it's really, really scary. And that gives them all a platform to stand on. We don't even notice their representatives. So interviewees were extremely worried about the implications of this particular political conjunction.
And consequently, everyone felt as sure as Rockon that we're not going to go anywhere. So as we discovered, first, second, third, and fourth generation British Bangladeshis had been made to feel that their ability to stay in the UK might suddenly be under threat in a way that it was not before. This very particular moment of discrimination has implications for transnational factors. So if you look at this interview between Shamia and Anisa, so I asked both mother and daughter, what do you think is the future for British Bangladeshis? And the mother said, it's not good, it's going to get worse, but we're just going to have to get on with it. It's not going to get any better, it's going to be life, probably will be harder for us, maybe even getting job-wise, even going out. So the daughter responds and says, sometimes you feel like on the inside people are thinking that, they never say it out loud, but it's on the inside. The mother responds with, so we'll never be comfortable, but... so I asked them, thinking what? And the daughter responded with feeling kind of wary of you, because obviously you look different. And no one will say it to you, but people who do feel uncomfortable by you won't ever go to you. And the mother continues and says, I just go to Bangladesh, we've got a home there, if anything gets worse. So in this context, Shamia considers the land her family owns in Bangladesh as a possible escape from discrimination they've been subjected to. So she was not alone in this case. So we interviewed Shoaib and his dad, Altab, and they speak to a similar sense of insecurity which many in the UK alluded to. So I asked them, do you think the economic investment you've made in Bangladesh adds to your life in Birmingham at all? And the father responded, we just did background for the future in case anything goes wrong or whatever for our children. So I said, in case what? And he said, it does happen. It does happen in Syria. Immigration, when people say you have to leave your country, you have to go. Still, I'm a migrant. I am British, but I am born in Bangladesh. So I asked him, how do you feel about that, Shoaib, that your dad has a plan B just in case you're deported or asked to leave Britain? And the son responded with, and he laughed and he said, I think that's a good idea, just a backup. It's nice to have a backup. So despite full citizenship, Altab felt he would always be considered a migrant in Britain. His citizenship would not have the same value as it does for someone born in the UK or for someone not racialised as Asian and Muslim. And in that context, a backup plan is necessary. Now, in Luton, Alamin situates his investment in land and property in Bangladesh similarly as a backup plan, so similar to those interviewed in Tower Hamlets and Birmingham. So Alamin adds, when I was young, they always used to say to us, my mum and dad, there might come a time when we get kicked out of this country, so you need a place to live. So maybe that is one of the reasons why he wrote it. There is definitely a possibility, because as we have seen recently, I don't think they will explicitly do that, like say, get out of the country. I think it would be more of an implicit thing, or more of a thing that is developed from the fear that the people are giving the South Asian community and maybe they feel unwelcome. I think that would be the thing that takes us to another country, or they will make it so difficult for us to lead our lives. I think in that sense it is important to invest purely because at any point in time that we did decide maybe we want to go back home and then stay there for the remaining years of life, it is good to obviously have something there to go to. And then we have Simu as a case study from Tower Hamlets, and she said at the end of the day, you think you're brown and you're Bangladeshi, and if ever anything happened, you would need to go back to your country, where your land is. So as you can see, as Simu puts it, your country is where your land is. It's interesting because in the UK, it wasn't until 1928 that the link between property ownership and political identity was officially further complicated. And in South Asia too, through the colonial period in India and the events of partition and later the liberation of Bangladesh, property ownership became a tool in the construction of citizenship. It is not surprising, therefore, that belonging is still in certain ways constituted in those terms. Investing in and possibly escaping to land and property in Bangladesh was central to a lot of the interviewees' depictions of reactive transnationalism in the UK. This is something that is difficult for quantitative research to capture, and it shows us just how hostile the hostile environment has become.
An important part of the policies associated with the hostile environment is the increased use of deprivation of citizenship now. 104 citizens were deprived of their British nationality in 2017 alone. Section 40 of the British Nationality Act 1981, as amended in 2006, says that the Secretary of State may by order deprive a person of a citizenship status if the Secretary of State is satisfied that deprivation is conducive to the public good. This power to deprive a person of their citizenship on the grounds of behaviour was very rarely used until quite recently, and it's only ever been used in cases of dual nationality or naturalisation because of statelessness provisions, which means that the application of the policy is inherently discriminatory. It's only ever been used against the children of immigrant parents, so citizenship rights have become conditional on heritage of citizens. The 2016 Tory Party conference, Theresa May argued, if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of no one, which caused a social media storm. But in many ways she wasn't wrong, in part because of policies that she herself put in place.
So one of the case studies we were hoping to look at was Shamima Begum's. So she's a young woman from not too far from here, from Bethnal Green, grew up in Bangladesh, in Tar Hamlets, and she left for Syria in 2015. And she was born and raised in Tar Hamlets, and it was earlier this year, in February, she gave an interview to the Times where she declared that she'd like to return to the UK and to give birth to her third child. Now, many of you may have followed this. Sajid Javid, the former Home Secretary, stripped her of her citizenship, and this caused quite a bit of diplomatic exchanges between Bangladesh and Sajid Javid. So the State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, Shahriar Alam, actually wrote a letter to the Home Office saying that Shamima Begum will not be granted citizenship in Bangladesh, and that she's Britain's problem. She's not Bangladesh's problem. That she can't just be dumped to Bangladesh. And so British Bangladeshis can apply for Bangladeshi citizenship up until the age of 21. You qualify to apply. So in this instance, the stripping of her citizenship, some have argued, was that Sajid Javid relied on that because she was 19, she still qualified, she still had those 2 years to qualify for citizenship in Bangladesh. But of course, considering the sort of context that she's found herself in, Shahriar Alam has just completely rejected that she'll ever be given the Bangladeshi citizenship. And what her case also represents is that the continuation of a range of policies which were created to two-tier system of citizenship have made it easier to kick some people out than others. And which leads us to our final section to look at how protective transnationalism works. So these are some of the arguments that we have sort of found that have come out of our data from across Luton, London and Birmingham. So investment in land property in Bangladesh as a backup plan. In the UK, experiences of anti-Muslim racism have led to a feeling of deep-seated insecurity as the political landscape has changed and to the desire to protect themselves through external connections and other sites of belonging. So they're reigniting the historical myth of return, which was usually associated with the first generation, that they would come, earn the money, go back, which of course didn't happen. But what we found in our data is that this is re-emerging amongst third, fourth generations who are actually reconsidering investing back in property and land in Bangladesh. Protective nationalism may have increased in line with political upheavals and nationalist or populist politics across the globe, and transnational identities can create uneven experiences of citizenship, and uneven experiences of citizenship can impact transnational activity in stark and revealing ways. So in the UK, interviewees that we had for our project, interviews of all ages and generations, contemplated increased transnational activity as an escape from the suspicion of hostility they experienced. And we argue that where protective transnationalism differs from reactive transnationalism is that it is not just about reacting to discrimination, it's about protecting one's future security in the face of it. So protective nationalism has, the continuous reminder of one's ambiguous status within British society opens up the possibility for young British Bangladeshis, to perpetuate what was often considered a first-generation phenomenon, this sort of re-engagement with the myth of return, which was abandoned according to literature with the first generation. Now, beyond this particular case, protective transnationalism may have increased, as mentioned, with political upheavals, and it was earlier this year mass deportations resumed again in Britain. So since the introduction of hostile environment policies in 2012, citizenship rights have been deliberately obscured, and deportation and removal targets have taken precedence over long-standing connections and belongings. The Shamima Begum case draws our attention to the way in which transnational identities can create uneven experiences of citizenship. And our interviewees draw our attention to the fact that these uneven experiences of citizenship, of course, then impact how they relate back to their relationship with Bangladesh, and then how that then plays out overall and how they see themselves. So, thank you very much, everyone.
Any questions? I have to leave that quickly, so I'll have to ask questions.
Sister, when you write on this book, sunsetting referendum and crossroad of the so, in consideration to this, your presentation is quite good, but at the same time, you have intermingled with so many different issues altogether that is very contradictory and doesn't give any definition of anything. Right? So let us tackle this referendum, right? The referendum issue is the issue Britain as a sovereign country, Queen and the Parliament as the head, and probably even British judge is even probable, proven recent matters in court. So let us, take one issue at a time. What is referendum means to the 64 million British public, and the Queen and the head, both quietly. So we are going to leave Europe first to maintain our sovereignty, right? And then we concentrate on other issues, our dual citizenship or racism or British Bangladeshi, or what would be our relationship with the Bangladeshi community, with the host community people of Great Britain, whether it is white or black. So, in this context, can you give me a bit explanation? What does the referendum means and what is going on last 3 years? I have written everything in this book. Before we joined in EU, this country was a heaven. I came in 1964, right? No fees in the school, college, universities. You don't have to give money back if you get a degree. Doctor, I'm sick, so go to the physician. There was no VAT, and it was such affluent and beautiful. But when you join in Europe, wheat is ruled by 10 bureaucrats of Europe, right? To the entire continent. They try to define it as the United States of Europe, and Britain as a dominant country, one of the European.
Can you might ask me a question? We'll invite you to give a talk next time.
Okay,
thank you relating to this stuff.
Okay.
Just to respond to that, just worth those couple of things. There's lots of stuff to respond to. First of all, I'd say that this isn't about kind of pros and cons of Brexit. We're not kind of here to talk about, because it wasn't about Brexit. In fact, we didn't ask you about Brexit. Brexit just came out of the interviews. We weren't looking for Brexit. So what we're interested in here is that some of the discourses around Brexit have intensified anti-Muslim racism. And That's what we're focusing on, not the rights and wrongs of Brexit. And the question of, what does Brexit mean? I mean, you're better placed to answer that than me because I don't know it.
Because discourse is too early. That's what I'm saying. Discourse of the whole combination, a complex things you presented. That's what I'm
I
saying.
absolutely agree with that. I mean, we're mixing up a million different things here. Completely hands up to that. I mean, actually, what we're trying to argue is that there's a bringing together of various different issues in a particular political conjuncture. So we're arguing that this coming together is what's created a particular moment. But yeah, absolutely fair enough.
Just curious, during the course of the interview, you speak on petition issues, particularly for Brexit, some of the, because I remember during the campaign, there's quite a few British politicians who were voting for Brexit on a pure basis of protecting their interests and privileges, especially here in the UK, especially when it came to immigration, allowing people from Bangladesh to be able to come here easily. Just like that EU was
It's a really good question. It's really important to emphasise that we interviewed 120 people, so obviously there's a wide variety of perspectives. And what we focused on here was something, again, that we were surprised by, we weren't looking for. It was the fact that people themselves came up with this association between the race and their experience and a relationship with Bangladesh, which is why we've kind of drawn on it. But there were a range of different perspectives, and actually Fatima's probably the best place to answer this question about people who did vote Brexit for all those reasons.
So Roton, we cited, who experienced this guy sort of storming into the kitchen, he voted Brexit. Yeah, he voted leave. So even after this sort of section, he continues talking about the fact that, I voted leave because I believe it will, make the country prosper, there will be better opportunities.
And often in relation to the restaurant industry
restaurant
particularly, obviously, because there was lots of stuff in the press at the time that it'd be easier to bring Bangladeshis in to work in restaurants.
Yeah, so we had a variety of, and we had people who were, politically aligned to different political parties. So it was a very, very complex,
I have, two questions. One is intensivising phobia. I was just wondering whether, Islamophobia in the US, I suppose. How, or was there a notion of the US where they keep talking your participants and expressing these things and concerns and where in some words that kind of affected their understanding of Islamophobia, their reaction to it, and how did they deal with it? So that's my first question. And the second question is to do with the generation and having a place back home. So if the parent, I don't probably miss this, but if the parent had some kind of property in Bangladesh and they're all willing to go and live there, did this cause an issue with the child and the child, I assume, is here, they want to go, did this cause any risks?
Really interesting questions. But just start with that second one first.
Okay.
Just to say that, we didn't really get onto that because actually we didn't ask people about this kind of backup plan of property in Bangladesh. It was just something that people started talking about, that they'd started to think about investing in Bangladesh, or they'd started to think about maybe maintaining that property that they were going to get rid of. So we didn't talk too much about how that would actually play out. And in truth, it was often discussed as an idea. People weren't actually going into the practicalities of doing this. It was much more of a kind of idea, well, I've got this back. So I don't even think, we didn't even get get the sense that in families people were really talking about, are we going to move people, but what definitely did come out of it was the fact that in relation to this kind of mythical possible return to Bangladesh as a backup, a range of different generations spoke about this as maybe a way of finding security in the future. So it wasn't just older people who were saying, we've got this property and we'll convince the younger generation to come to it. It was just younger people saying that might be the only option here. That kind of thing. Then you went into that.
I mean, yeah, you've covered it.
And then I just wanted to say, in relation to the first question, the vast majority of responses in relation to anti-Muslim and racism mentioned at some stage either hijab or beards. So physical appearance, visibility was hugely significant in relation to responses.
There was one gentleman I interviewed in Birmingham, and he explicitly spoke about his beard hindering sort of accessing the labour market and the way he was discriminated against, and he eventually got a job, and even then the sort of subtle microaggressions he was experiencing because of he had quite a long beard. Even when I interviewed him, it was quite a long beard. But also I interviewed sort of young women who didn't wear hijab but encountered Islamophobia once they're, so it's such a mix of people. Hijab, we didn't interview any with niqabs, but yeah, different encounters, different experiences. But the one I can remember explicitly in relation to Islamophobia was this gentleman and issues accessing the labour market with his big beard.
Did you have any also when you get into relations
Before.
It's a bit, I've identified research mostly. So you have a perception of that actual popularity. Is there any kind of impact? People having backup, or is there a clash of actually getting dual citizenship or getting too close to Bangladesh actually risks jeopardizing the thing? I imagine
That's a
that
very good
more
question.
people are worried about that after she getting citizenship.
Yeah.
But was anyone worried about that? But also, is that actually more realistic?
I think that's an excellent question. No one talked about that. Again, it wasn't something we asked people specifically. But post-Begum, that's definitely something which I think is on people's agendas more than before as a possible risk. Because we do know that people are more at risk if they have dual nationality. No one has been stripped of their citizenship who hasn't either got dual nationality or naturalised as British.
Because a lot of people we interviewed, we did ask them questions about sort of if they follow Bangladesh politics, and it was usually through that question some people sort of admitted to having Bangladeshi citizenship or not. But very few who were born and brought up here. In fact, I don't think any of them had Bangladeshi citizenship from just those interviews and questions around Bangladesh politics and if they vote in Bangladesh politics. So I don't remember any of the young British Bangladeshis having actual Bangladeshi citizenship. Few mentioned getting the stamp, the 10-year, but other than that, I don't remember anything about actually applying for the passport.
So was the backup option phase mostly coming from the parents?
Well, that was interesting because the backup option was really all about land.
Yeah.
It wasn't about getting Bangladeshi citizenship as a backup. It was just all about having a place, a land, a house to go to. So there wasn't really even an indication that people would necessarily, young people would necessarily think about getting Bangladeshi citizenship in order to do that. It was just this kind of safe space to go to, really.
Yeah. This assumption that mum and dad or grandparents have already done this, so I could just take a flight and I'm there. So yeah, there was never the conversation about, I actually need to apply for citizenship. That never came up.
Do you think it was for the older generation, what about the younger people? Did they also think that something happened to people living longer?
Well, there were people who were as young as in their 20s that talked about the fact that this is an option. We know there's property there. there was a kind of suggestion that it's only in recent years that people have started to think that might have any kind of value in their future. But
these
there
were
were
the
young
same,
people.
these were the same young people who don't take much of an interest in Bangladesh politics. Was what also we found, that there was always, whenever we asked that question, they would sort of laugh or have like a smug look, like, oh, why would you follow Bangladesh politics? But yet they still viewed Bangladesh as a safe haven should anything happen here.
And also some people sometimes that talked about really not enjoying going to Bangladesh sometimes, it wasn't as if this is a segment of the population that really felt very closely connected necessarily, and that went there all the time for holiday, and that loved it when they were there. Lots of people spoke very negatively with young people, sometimes spoke negatively about trips to Bangladesh. But so it was this kind of safety net. This is why it was kind of mythical in a sense. And I think that's why it's interesting that it kind of reignites this mythical term.
Sorry, big topic. I just give a quote. This group also have written, right? The language movement of language. Before I publish anything, I give some referential in wordings from the community. So a lady, young person, not lady, Miss Rajina, a student from the University of West. Very informative and interesting documentary events of the history, and learned a lot about my home country. So this kind of literature I like to produce, to pass on to the young to know their background, history, and Bangladesh, as well as East Indian suffering. So this young, second, third, fourth generation, they will know their roots, and through the literary culture and exchange, so that they could respect, regard, and can link up a bridge between UK and the Southeast Asia. Thank you. Sorry.
Unfortunately, I have to be
That was so interesting. I have so many questions in my head. I have a couple I want to ask. The first one about the younger generation. It sounds like there's a lot of romanticizing about Bangladesh as a safe haven without much attention to the practicalities of living there and also the political situation in Bangladesh. Did you encounter any of the young ones, I suppose, 20s, 30s, interrogating this romantic idea of Bangladesh as a safe haven? And with the older generation, I suppose 40s up, in terms of British Muslim identity formation, Brexit isn't the only watershed. 9/11 was a watershed, 7/7 was a watershed, the Russian affair was a watershed as well. Did they, when they were talking about going back to Bangladesh in the context of Brexit and Islamophobia, did they also reference those other key moments of our history?
Okay, I'll start with the second question. They did reference those moments, but it depended where we did the interviews. So, for example, when we did the interviews in Birmingham, a lot of local issues were brought up. So the Trojan Horse affair had a huge impact on the people we interviewed in Smethwick and Aston. People just felt scrutinised for, again, their faith. So this is how they sort of witnessed how Islamophobia takes place, and the media was infringing into the community, and then. But they did reference 7/7 because when we were analysing the data, we have various different nodes that we use to sort of trace the data. We found 7/7 came up significantly, particularly the Tower Hamlets interviewees, because one of the stations was just down the road. So it seemed like the relationship to particular events was also dictated by the geography. So I'd say that it did come up, but it seemed more. Because again, we actually didn't have a single question on Brexit because it wasn't related to our initial proposal that was sent for the project, but it's just the way the interviewees started bringing it up. So of course, with qualitative data, you then research, you continue to ask more questions, and this has all emerged out of questions we didn't even ask them. All of this data we're sharing today. So Brexit seemed to have become the moment for a lot of people to suddenly realise, oh my God. that jamin we have back home will come in handy, will prove useful. And the first question you asked for the younger generation was, we had a few young people speak about, for example, social media and how they got a chance to see people's stories on Snapchat and Instagram and then encounter the beauty of Bangladesh, the land of Bangladesh. And here we go. And I think the older generation, when we interviewed them, the dyad interviews, the parent with the child, I think the parents were almost enjoying the fact that their children were able to see that and find, tara shundor lage, that they can see their motherland. So I'm not sure if they challenged it, because the parents were almost sort of happy that the children were invested, even if it was through these Instagram stories or Snapchat stories. So we have quite a bit of data on actually social media and how young people relate and create a relationship to Bangladesh through these stories, and where their friends go during the summer holidays and they see it. But I wouldn't say, from what I can remember, to answer your question, that a lot of the parents were sort of challenging them, saying, But what was interesting was the distinction we found actually in the younger generation and the experiences of how they view Bangladesh. It was very gendered. The girls didn't like it, if we want to sort of put it on a scale, the girls didn't like it as much as the boys. The boys obviously got a lot more freedom, so the girls felt they were actually a lot more inhibited when they went to Bangladesh because of the gendered sort of expectations of, not going out at a particular time, not wearing particular colours, when they're out, at night time. So it was very much gendered, that experience of when they did go back home. So I think social media has definitely given them that romantic idea and all these different stories. But yeah, I wouldn't say, from what I remember, the parents challenged them. The parents seemed to enjoy the fact that, at least...
So I meant the young ones themselves, based on their own trips to Bangladesh, and, do they just focus on what they've seen on Snapchat and Instagram, or do they also kind of relate to their own experiences, actually living there isn't as, freedom?
Actually, just off the top of my head, I think most of the young British Bangladeshis who were interested in this backup plan were almost always young men. So I think that comes in with their gendered experience, I'm assuming. Obviously, we didn't ask any specific questions around that, but implicitly, I guess that's bound up with that gendered experience they have, right? So now that I look back, it's very much gendered of who wants to use this backup plan, and it's almost exclusively young British Bangladeshi men, not the women. So yeah, it's very much gendered, yeah.
Share something.
Sure.
Because when I organized the Bangladesh student, I did some people ask me for advice on this. This girl told me, she said, years ago, her father took her to Bangladesh. He had terminal illness, and he took her to a bank. He made her a nominee or something. She passed away. But she's back here, her father passed away. And she's afraid to go to Bangladesh because she thinks her relatives go to London. The money already grabbed, the money somehow. She was asking me, can she get the money from here somehow? And I really inquired, if you go there, you can ask them. And very lovely, then they will check, and nobody can get the money, if their name is not there. As far as she is, but she's afraid to go. And now, so many people are having new generation. They have so much problem with their parents or other properties and the paperwork. I get asked quite often, and I'm not an expert. So this is becoming a big problem. One of them who knows their grandfathers, bought a property, and they have been run by their relatives or political parties. And one guy told me recently, he said they were some brilliant inspectors, and they think it's worth £600,000 in each money, for property. I said, but only is not enough. You need fossa, you need the nandari, right? The only is including. If after you bought the property, it doesn't gain nandari, whatever it is, and fossa created, then you cannot really have possible because the property is from someone else's name. So there is so much complication involved, and a lot of obviously the influence of it is also pretty more than organized, effective process where the nation can be governed and a lot of systems to make sure they get their property. You know, the parents and grandparents are so hard to say and back. At the moment, it's very complicated, difficult to level.
I mean, within our data, we had some people who didn't necessarily have a house, but they had plenty of land. And it seems like they are quite invested in wanting to pass it on to someone in the family who will be able to do something with it. But a lot of them also already had buildings, like 3-4 sort of story flats on each floor. Some are being rented, some are just locked up. So whenever they go, that's when they hire someone like a chowkidar to like look after it or clean the place. So it varied, and again, it depended on how much they invested, and also it varied if it was their jamin in Sylhet, in the actual town, or if it was in their body, in the village, and what they were investing it in. So, yeah, but we didn't go into the intricacies of if people knew the sort of legalities around how it's done.
I think a lot of people are realizing now that their parents and grandparents invested so much, and they might not have access to this anymore, or they don't know how. Right? Like on a sick friend, 50 years, a sick friend, his father died now. He spent a lot of property too young, and he can do his brother when he's a bit careful.
Did you find any difference between, say, secular Bangladeshis and religious Bangladeshis in terms of this dream? Given,
How do you define secular?
well, I mean, say someone who's religious, who practices Islam, who identifies as someone who practices Islam, as opposed to someone who's secular, they may not practice, they may not pray 5 times a day, you know, I mean, given the political context of Bangladesh now, was there, I'm really curious to know, was there, how the extent of this dream to go back? Is it just a dream, or is it something that they're actually thinking of as this can be real, they're actually reflecting on a life, creating life back there? Does that make sense?
I think, as Victoria said, I think a lot of it is very much there somewhere in the head that, okay, we have this, should things get worse here, we just need to get the keys, passport, and go there. No one addressed the fact that they'd have to apply for citizenship. There was this sort of implicit assumption that, of course, I'm entitled to be there. So, I guess that's. I don't think there was. That itself was dictated by whether they were secular or religious. That played, I'd say, next to no role whatsoever, because this is why we're trying to redefine it and call it protective transnationalism, because it's literally about survival. That should I need to get out if this country gets worse, then I need to survive and I need to protect myself. And transnationalism comes in, Bangladesh is there, the property is there, and boom, we go. So I think it's just a very quite linear sort of thought processes that people have put into it. But if people will actually do it or not is another thing, because no one really went into detail about this is how we can do it. But everyone had land, everyone had properties, people had different investments. We had people we interviewed who invested in. So if your families watch ATN Bangla Channel S, they always have the adverts for like these block flats in Sylhet or like new hotels. We interviewed people who invest in those things. We interviewed people who invest in fisheries, in the fish industry, in ceramics. So people are looking for different ways to remain connected with Bangladesh and investing in these industries, ceramics, in fish industry, in these different hotels, flashy hotels going up in Sylhet, mostly in Sylhet, of course, because of the cohort of our interviewees. Whether it will be actualized or not is another thing. But a lot of it was very much about, we're safe for now because we have somewhere to go.
So, was there a class difference as well in terms of fallow stories, because obviously, I mean, if you have property back home, if you have land back home, if you have the ability to set up a business or invest in somebody else's business, that's something about your own, your financial. I mean, what about people that don't have, these assets?
Well, we did interview families who didn't have assets. We had interviewed families who did have large amounts of land, but they sold it off because of this whole thing of, well, no one's going to ever go there. So people spoke about how they had to familiarise themselves with the Bangladeshi law and how to get a lawyer back home and then sell that land, and then they just bought the money back and invested in properties here or whatever else, or extending their family homes is what they've used that money for here in Britain. Wait, what? Can you ask the question? What was the other section of the question?
So, so the people that don't have
Yes.
access to these resources, how are they?
Well, they just sort of, I mean, some of them it was a case of, well, we'll have to find something. But also the class element of your question is really interesting because some of the Bangladeshi families we interviewed, within the British context, they are pure working class families where the father is still either a restaurant owner or works as a waiter or as a kitchen porter, and the mother is like a housewife or does some sort of, because in Birmingham particularly there are still some factories running, so some of them still work in these like Eastern factory or some other glass factories. And what was interesting was how they're very working class in Britain but yet have properties back in Bangladesh. So it was really interesting looking at the class dynamic and even transnationally how suddenly they go up the class sort of ladder once they get closer to Bangladesh geographically. But here in Britain, they might be living in a semi-terraced house which is overcrowded. So their class positioning in Britain didn't necessarily represent what they were investing in back home. So that's another element we're trying to address as well, hopefully in our upcoming paper. But yeah, so class very much varied with, because I'll easily comfortably say most of the families we interviewed across Luton, London, Birmingham were working class.
But this is just in a British context.
In a British context,
but it's not just economic, because when you go back home, it's not just my family owns this amount of land. This is land that's historic, that's been in my family for generations. There are historic reasons. There are caste reasons, caste-based reasons.
Or caste.
Do you see what
came up?
Whether your sheikh will say. So it's not. So I mean.
Of course, there was
it's,
exceptions.
To talk about it in class, I asked the question. I think I simplified my terms, but it's not just about class. It's also about other.
There were so many other elements. A caste came up a lot. But within our data, caste only came up in relation to marriage, mostly, in our data. So people said very honestly, especially when we did the diet interviews where the parents were above the age of 50, they would just abruptly in Bengali say, no one from a lower jat is going to marry one of mine. And it's there in the transcriptions. When we look back at the data, people were very explicit about, I'm never going to give my daughter or son away to a Khamjat, to basically someone who is of a lower caste. Or some of them were just referred to as people with no jat, so basically people who don't exist within even the jat caste system. But jat never came up in relation to property, transnationalism. It was always in relation to marriage and transnationalism, but never property, land. In that case, in that instance, no. And a lot of the land that was bought by people, it was done sort of over many, many years. Sometimes it was done by the grandfather, and then if a plot of land came up next to that same domain, then the son would have gone back and bought it. So it's a case of accumulating land within a small plot that the father may have bought, then the son buys it, another grandson can access it. So it's accumulated over generations.
I wanted to follow up to what Carter was asking. What other kind of manifestations of kind of protected transnationalism did you come across by that? Did it go beyond the economic, i.e. the parents being very keen to get their children to marry, for example, someone from Bangladesh, so they can have that link? And on top of that question, I wanted to ask was, from the research that you've done, do you think protective transnationalism is to do with having a backup plan only, or the fear of losing their Bangladeshi identity by living in a foreign country for years, in this case Britain?
So one of the reasons why the backup plan started coming up was because a lot of our interviews started within a period of within 7 weeks after the referendum. So I think that's one of the reasons why Brexit came up a lot. And obviously our project itself, when we sent in the proposal, was to look at transnationalism and citizenship. So that was our core sort of hypothesis of trying to link those two elements and look at the community. And it seemed that the economic sort of framing of transnationalism became the sort of crux of sort of survival, this backup plan. But it didn't come up in relation to marriage. In relation to marriage, it was always about the preservation of identity. So I interviewed people who were in transnational marriages. So so just to think of one mother I interviewed with her 2 daughters. Her husband was from Bangladesh, and she said because her husband is Bangladeshi, that's why the kids are able to speak Bangla, because she doesn't speak Bangla very well, because she was born and raised here, the mother. So people do use transnational marriages as a way to maintain the Bengali language or culture in the household. But they never spoke about it in relation to sort of, in how we're framing it, economically. It was never spoken from that perspective. It was just a case of, if we marry so-and-so into our family, at least there'll be someone who'll help us retain that connection. Because there's a fear that the more sort of the older generation is dying away, like grandparents are dying, there's less of a connection with Bangladesh.
So you wouldn't classify the marriage thing as a form of protective transnationalism in this instance?
It is, but not in this backup plan context. It is in more sentimental, more sort of identity related. So that we need to preserve our language, identity, culture, and that's done through marriage.
Okay.
But marriage doesn't necessarily provide them that economic security, because they will likely be relying on the British spouse for their security. Does that make sense? So it becomes reversed. Yeah.
Security in terms of identity.
No, for the person coming from Bangladesh, they can't really offer them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they're coming and essentially their protected transnational is relying on the British spouse, right? But when it's the other way around, it's more to do with the cultural element of my husband or wife can give my kids access to the language, access to the culture, the food will be there, because people felt that it's when you retain that you have access to the culture, language, and food. So it was more sentimental and sort of related to identity, not in relation to sort of survival, so to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you said that people haven't thought about citizenship or anything, but that question about marriage reminds me that is there no thought that the MVC, the stamps, actually won't pass down to the next generation? As far as you have to be the child of a citizen or married to a citizen. If you're not, you can't get that stamp. So I think a lot of us have that. I don't think any of our children or spouses will get a stamp.
I don't know how it works legally. If you just need to prove lineage to Bangladesh, or if you actually need to physically prove that.
So you need to give the passport of the person who.
Yeah. I know, for example, my dad's a Bangladeshi citizen, so I know when my brother had to get the stamp, my dad had to go with this passport. But I don't know if you do have Bangladeshi parents, but neither of them have the passport, I don't know if you can or not. But are you saying you can't?
Yeah, basically you have to be the spouse or the child, of a
Bangladeshi citizen.
So I'm just thinking in terms of the backup plan.
Yeah.
It seems like there's not much planning done apart from buying property.
Well, but some of the individuals we did interview were Bangladeshi, but then became British citizens because they weren't naturalized.
I'm thinking more of like the young ones.
Well, the
so
younger
basically, after a generation, that backup.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think the younger generation are even thinking about the legal sort of implications of what they were saying. It was just a case of, well, dad's got this jameen, dad's got this, 4-story building in Sylhet, or this person in my family has invested in this fish industry. So it was a case of literally just seeing that as a backup plan should things get worse. So no one was going into any detail of, actually, I need to apply to become a Bangladeshi citizen, I need to do this, I need to do that, or the lifestyle there, can I do I even speak the language? Because a lot of the younger Bangladeshis didn't actually speak Sylheti. So no one was considering any of that, language, citizenship, legality, any of that, because it was just a case of, I need to protect myself. Hence the phrasing. Yeah.
Did you come across any, and how many, who don't want to go back, who express no interest in protecting transnationalism?
I think we found a lot of people do want to go. Well, those who didn't explicitly express going, but they did express wanting to at least see their parents' or grandparents' motherland. So there was never, no one was very dismissive or anything. Some of them definitely expressed I have not really enjoying it, particularly the women, the younger women didn't enjoy it because they just found it very restrictive. But generally it seemed like they enjoyed the space, particularly the village life. People always spoke highly of the village life than they did being in Sylhet itself. That in the village you have a lot more freedom, there's a lot more space, you can breathe. But in Sylhet it's very loud, crowded, so a lot of different relationships were created with the city and then the Bali experience. Should we take one more question?
So I keep following up my class here, but so in terms of the kind of relationship that you saw with young Bangladeshis towards Bangladesh as a country, was it and especially in light of, for example, how you mentioned social media and how people saw these wonderful images, like a romanticized version to a certain degree of Bangladesh, would you say their relationship or their perceived relationship was more economic as opposed to curiosity about their identity? And if so, did that fluctuate between different age ranges, i.e. the older you got, the more economically you viewed your relationship with Bangladesh as opposed to it being, this is my family's ancestral home, that's why I want to go back and see.
Just to give you a very generalized response, most of it was economic, that relationship. Some did speak about, of course, the fact that they don't speak Sylheti very well, or the fact that a lot of parents we interviewed weren't happy about the fact that a lot of the centres, particularly in Birmingham, I remember, there were a few centres around Sylhet and Aston that used to provide Bangla lessons alongside madrasa teachings, which was, I know, the case here in Tahammuz as well, but this came up more in our data in Birmingham, expressing the frustration at the fact that, they don't even offer Bangla classes anymore. They've literally just been taken out. It's just like Tajweed classes. But the younger lot, when they did, reiterate points about protected transnationalism, it was just purely economic. They barely spoke Sylheti when they did with their parents. So a lot of these interviews were conducted in Bangladesh. So Bengali always came into every interview. So yeah, language was these ones.
And in terms of the age ranges of the perception of
well, the older, if we interviewed a parent, I remember a father and a son, but the father was in his, I think he was mid-60s or late 60s, and his son was maybe in his late 30s. But that was a really, so I think we, because we obviously didn't speak about methodology, but I think it's important that I mention that there was a lot of, I don't think a lot of like these diet interviews that I conducted, I don't think a lot of these young or children have that kind of relationship with their parents to discuss things the way they did in the interviews with me, the stranger. So, for example, this parent who was in his mid-60s with his son, it almost felt like it was a very old-school Bengali father-son relationship, because the son didn't speak much. Whatever his dad said, that's it. He didn't add much to it. So it really also depended on the parent-child relationship. So that relationship was very old-school, where once the father said something, the son pretty much agreed, and that was it. So there were different dynamics at play. Whereas when I interviewed Bangladeshi parents or British Bangladeshi parents who maybe came when they were like 2 or 3 and they were interviewed with their children, there was a slightly different relationship because they spoke English. So language also played a role in their relationship with each other. So for example, I interviewed a mother and 2 daughters. The mother did a lot of interpreting for the NHS for elderly Bengalis who didn't speak Sylheti, and she came in with her 2 teenage girls, And it was almost like watching three friends talking. And also she was a very young mother, she was 38, so she got married in her early teens, 38 with her two daughters. So I think even their sort of relationship and how they spoke about Bangladesh depended on their relationship with that parent who had that direct connection with Bangladesh. So those are things we're also interrogating about the fact that there were other different dynamics at play when these interviews happened. And obviously some of the civil society interviews we did were with people who are very aware of the sort of localized politics. So in Luton, when we interviewed people, people were very aware of what the Bangladeshis went through in Luton, the struggles of setting up the Bangladesh Youth League. Birmingham was the same. So a lot of it was also very much localized, the politics, the understanding, the relationship with Bangladesh. And obviously what we found, and I think it goes without saying, I don't think it's just our research, but HANBURY obviously, because of its resources and access to different associations, people from different parts of Sylhet, that there was a lot more, it seemed, diversity of opinions and also things they could access, whereas in Luton and Birmingham it was not quite the same.
One question I'll ask you. You mentioned about the different opinion between girls, and the boys, right? How old were the girls that you interviewed? Age rate, roughly?
Oh, they varied. We interviewed young women from who were 18, who had just finished A-level exams, to women who were in their late 30s with their mothers or fathers. So it really varied.
So young women,
but the youngest women were the ones who...
They were?
Yeah.
Were they under pressure to get married, or people were trying to get married, or is no more an issue anymore?
You see, within our marriage data on transnationalism, what we found is, right now, the marriages that are taking place transnationally is mostly British Bangladeshi men marrying women. It's not women anymore. And that's what came up in our data across the three sites. Because the women feel that it actually could potentially hinder them because of the sort of economic disparity between the spouses. Whereas the British Bangladeshi man continues to marry from abroad. So yes.
And those who were grown up and born here?
Yeah, British Bangladeshis who were born and brought up here. I've interviewed whose wives are from back home.
What's the reason to take the reason why they decided?
Well, because marriage wasn't our focus, I never asked any more additional questions. But it was, but when they related it back to transnationalism, it was to do this protection of identity. Although I'm not sure. I'm sure there are other things involved there, but I don't want to say because it didn't come up in our data. But it definitely was Bangladeshi men, British Bangladeshi men marrying from abroad, women were.
Because what I was thinking, like some girls, when they go, this is what I've also observed. There's a lot of men just trying to find a British Bangladeshi girl who can marry them, right? So that they get like orders and things like that,
What we found, because we had some marriage questions towards the end of the interview, and there were questions we would ask in front of the parents. And again, considering, you're talking about marriage in front of the parent who has an unmarried child, and also considering that dynamic. So a lot of the children would just admit, especially the girls, it was just a straight up no, I wouldn't marry someone from Bangladesh. And what was really interesting was how, because I remember a lot of British Bangladeshi men, they were married to women from back home, because I interviewed a few of them. And it was interesting because when I did meet them in person, separate from the interview, just sort of interacting with them post-interview, it's interesting because there's a language barrier that is so clearly visible between the husband and the wife. But actually, I remembered one interview I did in Town Hamlets in Mile End. She's British Bangladeshi. She married her husband from Bangladesh. But, so she married him, and she spoke about how she used a specific term which I can't remember, but she holds the power essentially in the relationship because she's the British person and who gave him his citizenship. And she spoke about how when they go to Bangladesh on visits, how he then becomes really cocky. She speaks about this in the interview actually. She gave us we've got so many quotes from this interview, where she speaks about how suddenly the power dynamics shift, where he suddenly thinks he's the king king of the house. And when they go back home, he's always sort of, I'm the Londonese, I've come here with my wife, my 2 daughters. And she said in the interview, it's when we come back home, we have a lengthy chat about his behaviour. And it was really interesting because she spoke about, because back home, because obviously you have to display a level of masculinity, I'm the man, I'm the head of the household. And she said, but here, we know who wears the trousers, we know who brings the money, or who brings more money anyway in the relationship. So she spoke explicitly about the sort of power dynamics at play because her husband's from back home, and how that's then impacted her 2 daughters, who are both teenagers, relationship with their dad because of the language barrier. So the 2 daughters have a better relationship with the mother than they do with their father because of the language barrier. So that's the only explicit one I can remember. But she spoke about how the power just changes when they go back home, but when they're back here, he's under her thumb, sort of kind of thing, power dynamics. So yeah.
Just one more thing I want to share. About 10 years ago, I had a phone call suddenly from a girl. She said she found our flyer in the library.
She found what, sorry?
Flyer, Redclift library. And she said that she just wants some advice. She doesn't know where to go with advice. I said, I'm not an advice provider. I know nothing about it. But she said, KOBI was really helping her. So what she was saying, she was in a distraught situation. I said, well, I can't advise you. I'm not trained or anything like that. She said she tried to run with her mom, age of 18, and they forced her to get married. And then, then she brought her husband here. She got kicked. They broke up, and now she don't want him to get stamp on his visa. It's not 2 years here, because that time was 2 years. And she wants to get him kicked out, before he can get it. And she wants my advice. I said, this is crazy, I can't advise you. Go to a solicitor or some local advice provided. So many things are happening. They're not being captured by any studies.
I think there needs to be a whole separate project on just marriage itself and how it's changing in the Bangladeshi community. Because people we did interview came from very mixed families as well. We interviewed quite a few families who were very mixed in the marriages between within their sort of siblings, marrying different people from different cultures. So but again, because marriage wasn't the focus, we didn't have other explicit questions around it. But the other thing I wanted to mention about marriage and transnationalism was how people brought up the fact that you have to earn £18,000 to show proof. So that came up a lot, particularly in Birmingham, it seemed. Not so much from what I remember in Luton or London, perhaps because of the proximity to essentially London for Luton, and Londoners having access to the job market where you can't really live on 18k in London itself. But in Birmingham it came up that it's hard to get a job with 18k. So to earn 18k and then bring the spouse over and then have to prove that you can then afford to pay rent and all those other things. So that seemed to be something that 18k came up a lot more in Birmingham than it did in Luton and London. And I think, and I'm just assuming from the data, it's to do with the fact that Lutonians and Londoners obviously have access to a job market that people in Birmingham don't. So yeah.
Yes, the type of jobs as well.
Sorry?
The type of jobs.
Yeah, and the type of jobs, yeah.
I think she's got it today.
Okay.
Thank you very much.